that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
This is the Ray Ellis Podcast. Let's get behind the why.
Oh, yay.
Hello there, and welcome back to Behind the Why. Today, we're going to take on a whole new concept. Well, perhaps not whole new. We're going to talk about the concept of freedom.
Ooh.
Freedom.
Freedom.
What did William Wallace say? You can take away my life, you can take away my lands, but you can't take away my
freedom.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about freedom.
Yep.
But like with all things, I want to start off with a passage of Scripture just to kind of give us a foundation, because I think when it comes to government and all those things that are happening around us, we need to know why and where it comes from. So let's look at a passage from the Gospel of John. Again, I'm going to read to you from John chapter 8, verse 32. And it's a very well-known passage of Scripture. Jesus is talking. He says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."
Free.
The truth shall make you free. Now, to that end, what I want us to do today, Jordana, as we go forward into this, is talk about this concept of freedom as we're experiencing in our freedoms, I believe, are really under attack. And so I want to talk about freedoms, and I want to go back to Genesis as our nation, our government was being formed, should I say. So let's talk about one of those founding documents. In future programs, maybe we'll talk about some others. But today, let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to read this opening to you because I think, for one, most people don't know it. So I want to read it to you. It says, "In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." He goes on, he says, "To this end, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now let's stop there and talk for a second. As we're talking about a government, one of the things that he says here is this freedom that they were pursuing as a people at that time, and the freedoms that we now enjoy. He makes a statement. He says they are brought to us by the laws of nature and of nature's God. So he brings us back to the foundation of what this freedom is based on, right? Is that as men, we have a desire to be free. And I forget which were the founding fathers that said it, but he made this statement that because we speak, I think maybe it was Madison in the Federalist Papers, he said, because we speak, we have a need to be governed.
That's real, right?
That's why government exists. It's because we speak. And to bring this in a context, let's look at it this way. In the context of the European Union, with the Brexit thing that's going on over there. And I think it's 25 different nations that are involved in that. I may be off on the number, but the point is that they're different nations. And as one person uncovered in interviewing one of the youths over there, said, "What do you think about the Brexit?" And the kid was like, "Well, we're all for it." And he said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, we're not English, we're Europeans." And so this gentleman asked this young millennial the question. He said, "Well, how will you have, what ability do you have to voice a complaint against government under this European Union?" He said, "What common language do you have? What common culture do you have?" And so we start thinking about this monopoly of government without the ability for the people to speak to that government and have an influence on that government. You really don't have freedom.
You don't.
You don't have any kind of freedom whatsoever. You begin to exist under the despotism of that governing power. And I see a lot of that happening right here in America. We think about the way our governments have been acted. And I want to go through some of the tenets later on of the Declaration of Independence, but we want to look at this. So let's go back and let's talk about this. One of the things that constantly comes under attack, you hear people say, what is meant when they say we have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? What do you think about when you come to that?
I know it's generally thought of when we say, especially, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. is what I want. The right to pursue what I want the way I want.
Right.
And typically I think we do see it's this push to, nowadays, we interpret it as my happiness, my pleasure, and having the freedom to do that.
Right. And people talk about that. And they use that to attack even the concept of, like our president's been using this "Make America Great,"
Right?
The MAGA thing. Let's make America great again. And we say, okay, and they turn that to mean something that is self-oriented and selfish and antithetical to the doctrine of Christianity. And I itemize Christianity because even though we are a nation that allows for the freedom of expression of religion, we were founded on the plantation, or the foundation, should I say, of Judeo-Christian, of the Judeo-Christian faith. So that's why I go back to that. So when you think about that, we have to take that back into consideration of the people who wrote it, not of today's mob. And I do say mob. Because
it's mob thinking. And I love that you said that, because a lot of the people that I'm reading about in scholarly journals, scholarship, right? And different just intellectuals, they'll say, we have to make sure we look at history so we repeat it, so we don't repeat it. We have to look at things in the context of when they were written. And it's like, okay, you say that, but you're not doing that.
Right.
Because we are reinterpreting things to fit even what perhaps we want it to, or to fulfill some sort of story that we think fits best. Or
I mean, you think back to the whole thing with the Betsy Ross flag and the tennis shoe. The mob mentality has gone back now and taken that out of its historical setting, redefined it to mean something racist.
Right. Or same as this, when we say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Right.
They even say, well, that they didn't mean all men.
Right.
And it's like, okay, however, how often have we seen in this nation people using this to fight for and then establish their rights as being equal?
All men,
equal. So.
And even with the ERA, Legal Rights Amendment, it came back down to this fact that no, this is inclusive, it's all inclusive.
Right.
So when we start talking about this mob mentality that seems to be running rampant, not only in government, but even in the church, we see people adapting these mentalities of, like the CRT, going to critical race theory and just giving in to these ideas. And I go back to the election when candidate Trump was running and the videotape came out. And I was just so, angry, I might be the best word. When I saw these established Christian, quote unquote, Christian leaders who would come out and condemn then candidate Trump for something they had done a decade past. And I'm not even justifying argument, but my argument is against the Christian mentality that comes in and says, we are a faith that's based on forgiveness.
Right.
That God has forgiven me all my great sins, so how can I hold a sin against my brother? And all of a sudden these guys, and it come down to the dollar, of course, that they got on the bandwagon again.
Right. It's so funny you say this. It just makes me think recently with, I forget his last name, but Botham.
Yes.
Was it Botham Jean or Jean? What is that?
I have trouble pronouncing his name.
I don't remember his last name. It was like, but anyways, he was a
young man in Texas that was shot about 2 years ago, I think it was.
It was in 2018 by the officer who had come into the wrong apartment, right? So recently, though, they had the hearing.
Wait, before you go there, because a lot of people don't know what happened.
Okay.
So basically what happened, a young lady, female officer, who had just worked an extremely long shift. She worked a 10 or 12-hour shift, something, a 13-hour shift. So it was a long shift. She was coming home. She was involved in a conversation on the phone, and she was the thing that came out of news was that she was having an affair with a married man. She was talking to this man on the phone or texting when she came home. Being tired and distracted, she parked on the wrong floor of the parking structure, so thus came out on the wrong floor of the apartment building, went to the apartment that would have been hers had she been on the correct floor, found the door open, and saw this man sitting in what she believed to be her living room.
And I've totally done that before. It's totally possible in those apartment buildings that look the same. I've done that.
Yeah, I remember back when your mother and I first got married, we had a Datsun B210 and a unique kind of car. But I found myself opening people's car because the car door would open and getting in their car before I realized this is not my car. Oh my God. So I know how it could happen. Now, the problem that went on beyond that was that she reacted, and wound up shooting this guy and killing him.
The young man's last name is spelled Jean.
Okay.
Jean.
John.
That's why I wasn't sure if it was Jean or John.
Botham John.
Botham.
Yeah, Botham. So I know I was tearing his name up.
Right.
But go ahead. I just want to give a little
So
context.
that's the context of it. And then what happened recently, just in this last couple of weeks, they had the sentencing. Mm-hmm. And so after she was sentenced, Botham's brother is on the stand, and he's just speaking to her. Right. And you would expect him to be like, you deserve this. Mm-hmm. I hope you rot in prison. Uh-huh. You've caused my family such great pain. But he doesn't. He says, I wish what's best for you, because Botham would. And what's best for you is for you to give your life to Christ.
Right.
And it's like, what is he saying to this woman? And there was genuine love, even in his expression towards her. And he was just telling her, give your life to Christ. I wish the best for you. I love you. And then
he didn't deny his pain.
He didn't deny his pain. He said, loss. He admitted all of that. But even so, he's like, I wish the best for you. Mm-hmm. And then he asked the judge, can I give her a hug? And his voice is breaking. He's like, please, can I give her a hug? Yeah. And the judge is crying, right? And it's like, yeah. And then he embraces this woman. They hug each other. But here's the part that gets me. We're talking about this idea of we're talking about forgiveness. Right. This blows up on the internet, of course, because stuff like this doesn't happen. It's not natural to forgive your enemies like that. And so people are flipping out.
Yeah. People
are saying, oh, how dare he do this? All this stuff, like she deserves this. She's not worthy of forgiveness. And then this one guy who claims to be a believer, he has a big following on Twitter. He says, he posts a picture of them hugging, and then he says, post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And I'm like, how shameful, really? He's bought into this life CRT and all this stuff. So in his mind, even though he says he's fully justified, and he says he's a believer, all these things, and he can look at this, and even saying he's a believer, is missing how God used this opportunity for this woman to hear the gospel, to experience grace, even though she's still going to prison. Yeah,
she didn't get out of prison. She still got a 10-year sentence over her head. She
still has a consequence.
Right.
But the fact that here she's in a courtroom, and even the judge afterwards comes up to her, gives her a Bible, and tells her to read John 3:16. So I'm like, God is using this terrible, ugly, heart-wrenching situation so that he'd be glorified. And then here are people who claim to be believers who have been so delusional, and deceived by these worldly theories and tenets that they're missing the gospel. They're missing grace. Point. They're missing forgiveness. They're missing the point.
Now, let's go back to our opening thought.
Right.
Jesus said, you shall know the truth.
And it shall set you free.
And the truth shall set you free. So here's some truths in the situation that you just gave. She committed a very horrible thing. She was living a very horrible lifestyle. She was distracted, and she killed a man.
And she can't take it back.
Those are truths.
Yeah.
Another truth, she was found guilty in a court of law of her peers. Another truth, she's going to prison. Another truth, she doesn't deserve forgiveness. There's nothing about her that deserves forgiveness.
Right.
But you don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve forgiveness. And the people who are hating on her don't deserve forgiveness. Right. That is what grace is. Grace is when you get something you don't deserve.
Right.
And so we see the ultimate grace being in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life. No, we don't deserve it. Romans chapter 5, right? Christ, the godly, died for the ungodly. So we all die. We all sin in Adam, as the Bible says.
While
but
we were
in
yet
Christ,
sinners,
we have life. So we don't deserve grace. None of us do. No, she absolutely is guilty. And if judged guilty, then she should go to prison, which she is. However, that has nothing to do with whether or not this young man conducts himself according to his Christian beliefs, which would be to say, I forgive you. I release you from my personal debt. You still have your civic debt, but your personal debt is forgiven. So we come back now to this idea of government, because this whole mob mentality that we just got through referencing, how people get all whacked out and crazy, comes back to what the founding fathers were trying to work against when they created this Declaration of Independence. We see, as he said, no, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But he goes on to say, it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, we can go on and on to that. And there's a whole list of things right there in the middle of this Declaration of Independence that the King of England had done. It's violations against those rights, those unalienable rights. And we can talk about those, if not this time, then perhaps in our next segment. But we see how in doing that, the people of America, the United States, said, no, we have to stand up and we have to fix this, because what you're saying right now is that your power should come from us, but yet you're not representing us. And I remember back when I lived in the state of California, there were a number of times that the initiative was put on the ballot of whether or not the people of California wanted same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. And time after time after time, it was voted down. And in the same spirit of King James, or Edward, or what's his name? Not James, I'm thinking of the Bible. The King of England.
I forget what his name is. I would have probably known if we wouldn't have.
Yeah, if I hadn't said it out loud. The King of Great Britain. Who was the king at that time? I have it written down in one of my notes.
Anyways, the king.
He would override the will of the people and do what he wanted to do. And that's what I saw represented there in California. Now, before anybody gets upset, this is not an argument about whether same-sex marriage should be legal. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the process that made it so.
King George III.
King George III, the voice of reason.
The voice.
Thank you, sir. And so what we find here is that even though the people voted, the people said, you had a small group of power that said, that's not what we want. Mm-hmm. And so they overrode the will of the people. And that's what brings us back to the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the brilliance of that document, and that how they separated the powers. Mm-hmm. You had the President of the United States, who is his constituents, is not necessarily the people of America, but it really is the Electoral College. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that actually vote for the president.
The representatives for each state.
And then we have the Senate, whose constituents are the people.
Right.
The Senate is supposed to hear the people's voice and take that voice back into Congress. And then the other side of that is the representatives. Go ahead.
I just think it's funny because, they're supposed to, right?
Yes.
And they always say, we're speaking the voice of the people. I'm like, which people?
Yes.
Which people? Because, no. You talk to the average person, and I'm like, you're not being represented by the Senate.
At all.
So who are they talking to? That's my question.
They have their own little group that they're representing. They're doing in a smaller version what King III did.
Because they do have a big group rallying around them, but it's not the majority.
George III.
King G3. KG3, that's who that was. King George III. So we see that same process happening again, where people are putting forth their own desires over the rights and the desires of the people.
Right.
And they have justified themselves by virtue of their position to say, no, I know better. Mm-hmm. I know what's right. And we see this happening over and over and over again, where we're changing the meaning of words. We're changing their contextual meaning to mean something that fits our dogma. Right. And we see this argument happening. There's this one statement I'm going to read to you from the Declaration of Independence. I highlighted it here. It says, this is talking about the rights of the people to effect a change in government. It says, to effect their safety and happiness, prudence indeed will dictate the government long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. And I look at that and I think, oh my goodness, the human creature has not changed, especially as I relate it back to the black community in America. And I see how we have, as a people, glommed onto the Democratic Party. And even in watching that documentation that gentleman asked me to watch called The 13th, and just listen to them talk about this CRT movement in America and how they portrayed all the problems of the black community to being the problem of the white man imposing his will. Right. And I'm going, no, that what you're looking at there is the exact same thing the Declaration of Independence is talking about here, is that you are suffering this bad situation because it's sufferable. Mm-hmm. And you have a tendency not to change. Why? Because it's normal. It's common.
Normal. You become complicit in it as well. Almost.
It would have been so much easier for the colonies of 13 states to just put up with KG3 than it would be to go to Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
It would have been easier. Mm-hmm. It would have been far easier for these men not to sign their name, their life, their liberty, and their sacred honor. It would have been so much easier to stay anonymous and just go to the tavern and complain about it. It would have been so much easier for them to do nothing and let the evil persist than it would be for them to sign their names. So once they signed their names, there was no backing up from it.
Hey, we did it.
There's no saying, hey, joke, I was just kidding. No.
And I think in a contemporary sense, because people, they're spouting things all the time, right?
All the time.
But that's easy, because talk is easy.
Yes.
It's easy to complain.
Talk is cheap, as they always say.
But to stand for something that is against the mob mentality, that takes courage. And that also brings about change.
You know, courage is one of those things that is another one of those words that is so misused in this nation today. Words like courage and heroism.
Right.
More often than not, we see them attached to people who can hit the three-pointer at the buzzer.
Right.
And throw up that white power symbol, you know. that mighty white power symbol.
Yeah. The three-pointer.
Stephen Curry, I can't believe he's a white supremacist.
And all the other players.
Or the guy who pushes the ball ahead through a pile of other grown men getting paid millions of dollars, and he crosses a painted line on the ground. We call that heroism, and we call that courage. And granted, if you got 9 400-pound men trying to break your head in half, it takes about a little bit of courage to grab that ball and run with it. Yeah. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, I can
But
imagine.
at the same time, that is not the same type of courage that it takes to come home every day when your paycheck is smaller than your needs, and you still stay in the battle to be a father, just be in that house, to be a representative of manhood, of true manhood to your children, to teach your sons how to love a woman by loving your wife, not your girlfriend, not the one who's shacking with you, but your wife, the mother of these children. That's courage, who can day in, day out do the right thing. It's courage for a woman to stand in a marriage when she has a man who's not doing what he can do, what he should be doing, when she has to raise children and sometimes raise the man with her. Those kind of things are true courage. Courage when a police officer takes that call at 2 o'clock in the morning where you say, hey, this man is beating his woman, there's weapons involved, and you got to go in that house, you know, not knowing whether the guns are live or where the people are, whether they're homicide or suicide, you don't know, but you still got to go in that house because why? There's a woman in there who needs help. That's courage. You see, shooting a three-pointer, yeah, you may get talked about if you miss it. You know, if you fumble the football, yeah, you may get talked, but there's things that are real courage, and this is what we're talking about here.
Right.
I think the Oxford Dictionary has a great definition for courage.
Read it for us.
The ability to do something that frightens one, or strength in the face of pain or grief.
Do it anyway.
Right.
To do
That's
it anyway.
courage.
To do the right thing anyway. And that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about these guys who signed this Declaration of Independence, it took real courage. And I love the fact that, and the one thing that I want to kind of get as a foundation here is that what they used for their platform to launch this activity of courage was the knowledge of God, of nature. In other words, how we are created, and nature's God, the one who created us.
Yeah.
God made us to be a certain way. And they're saying we're going to stand up for what's right. And the other thing here I want to read to you is another misuse that we see all the time of the word. We talked about this earlier: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Words have so much power. I love words. And so I just want to read a couple of highlights to you from the lexicon, Autonomous Study of Words. It says, however, in 1776, the definition of happiness invoked a different meaning than it does today. Francis Hutcheson, an Irish reverend and philosopher, brought a new, more political interpretation of happiness to the English speakers with his 1725 treatise. He said, the action is best which accomplishes the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers, and the worst which is like manner occasions misery. So when he's talking about happiness here, and this is contemporary of the use of the word happiness as it is recorded in the Declaration of Independence. Again, read it again. It is that action which is best accomplishes the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers, and that worst which is in like manner occasions misery. So what he's talking about here is more akin to the word happiness as is used in the New Testament of the King James Version. And I made a couple of notes here. That Greek word is makaros, and it means literally the supremely blessed, by extension of fortune, well off, to be blessed, to be happier. In other words, it's that reaching out of being satisfied and completely filled. Now, the way it's used in the New Testament, once in John chapter 13, verse 16 to 17, Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If you know these things, happy are you if you do them." So, again, think about the mindset of who Christ is and what he told us to do. He says, you're happy if you do these things, if you know and do these things. Then the Apostle Peter wrote in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13 through 15, "And who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? But if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." What is Peter saying? He's saying if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are you. In other words, blessed, satisfied, fulfilled, in the best position to do what? For the greater good. And how does he go on and describe this? What does he say? He defines it here. He says, "And always be ready to give an answer to every man that asks you for the reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." So you see how that ties together now? Right. So if I am pursuing life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, I'm not getting more and more and more for me. It's not about that. It's about putting myself in the right position with Christ, with God, with truth, because truth is what ultimately what sets us free.
Right.
So if I have that real freedom, then what can you do to me?
Nothing. You know, it makes me think. So in Iran, how the church is blowing up, right? And women are primarily leading this, right?
This is true.
And we had watched, I heard it, but I was listening while you were watching it, this short video about the movement of like these women are just coming to Christ, leaving the Muslim, wasn't it Islam?
Islam, yes.
Yeah, the hold of Islam. And it's growing rapidly. And even these women were talking about, for them, she was even telling her husband, and, you know, he's a believer as well, you know, when we leave the house today, we might not come back.
The video is called "Sheep Among Wolves" over there. Because
they're recognizing that, church. You know, we could be killed for this.
Right.
But yet they're so convinced, and they know it's true, that they are willing to stand for that, knowing the cost. They've counted it up, but they're like, it's worth it.
Right.
And so it totally changes your life. And it makes me think, like last time we talked about, you know, this peace that the world gives versus the peace that God gives.
Right.
You know, and I think it's the same. The happiness that God gives versus the happiness that the world says they'll give you and promise.
Right.
It's such a stark difference. And
the difference is the matter of truth.
Right. Exactly.
It's the matter of truth.
That's that vertical standard we talked about.
And so when we come back down to this, if we are to perform in the way that God has called us to perform, then we will be satisfied to live life on that higher plane.
I think I heard some music. Huh?
Well, yeah, when things are going around the studio, sometimes they sneak in.
Yeah.
But we all know you're an important guy. It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, me? No, not even.
Busy. You know.
But we look at this whole situation again, and we need to be bringing this to an end. But this has been such a fascinating discussion for me, is that we think about this in the way our founding fathers established the government. Now, we all know about the separation of powers, the executive, judicial, and the legislative, and how we have worked to bastardize it to where you get a Republican president and you try to get a Republican Congress, and then you try to get the majority of Republicans in the Supreme Court. And that goes all the way down through the courts, all the way down from the Supreme Court, all the way down to the state and county levels. They try to get them all stacked up. Why? So they can circumvent what the founding fathers have done. And now, because we have become so convoluted in this, it's almost like that's become the natural way of doing things. Right. And it has weakened the government, not made it better.
And it's because people can't work together.
Because they don't have truth. Right. They're not working for truth. And so the problem here is that we have the government, the president is elected every 4 years, the Senate every 6 years, the House of Representatives every 2 years, and then the legislature, the courts, of course, are appointed for life. But the beauty of that structure is designed so that you and I can't go in haphazardly overthrow the government.
Right.
The quickest you can do that is somewhere between 5 and 6 years before you can actually get a flushing of the government completely, because it takes all 3 of those rotations in order for that to happen.
That was quite brilliant.
It is. And
to
it goes
come up with that.
And you come back and you think about it had the foundations what made that possible.
Right.
Because they were depending on nature's God.
And it's even like, I think I talked to you about this a few days ago, but really, because like we're saying here, the founding principles of the documents of the United States were founded on biblical principle.
Yes.
Okay. Doesn't mean they were all sold out believers,
right.
but it was biblical principle. And just by, look at history and the nature of people, but also the word of God
right.
recognizes that men are deceitfully wicked. Your heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? So they understand the moral decline that can take place
right.
within a human being. Okay.
Right.
A lot of other world systems are coming from the standard of, sorry, we're killing flies on the side, so it's always fun. But a lot of the world standards are coming from this idea that people are naturally good.
Yeah.
At their heart of hearts, they're good.
Yeah.
If you put the right system in place, they'll be good. And I'm like, no, they'll never be good.
People
ever.
good.
Right? And so this structure of which our nation was founded was brilliant in the sense of recognizing that people are evil. You got to do something to try to restrain it.
I think it was Jefferson that said, and again, I'm bad on names, but I think it was Jefferson that said, we wouldn't need government if men were angels.
True. If we were perfect, it's like
and
that.
that's the problem.
And even
that
angels
we're
aren't
not.
perfect, right?
So that's the problem. That's not. And
Yeah.
so when we think about this nation and everybody's talking about how evil America is, I'm saying to you, wake up. This is time
Wake up.
really to get woke, okay?
For real.
But wake up to reality. America is the
Wake up.
greatest nation on the earth today simply because it has a good foundation. Not because what we've built on it has been good, but because the foundation is good. And once we destroy the foundation, the house can't stand.
Bye-bye.
So we look at this as, again, I'm listening to this lecture from Hillsdale College, one of the professors there. He was talking about the trending of the westward expanse. And when the Europeans discovered the new country, and you think about the fact that, this is the last bastion of new land. There's nowhere else new to go. And so when they came, they transplanted their culture with them. They brought the culture, the idea of freedom of religion and civic freedom with them. The thing they did not bring, according to this lecturer and my observation as well, they didn't bring the aristocracy.
Right.
So they did not have an elite people set to lead and be in charge. So the leaders of the people had to come from within the people, i.e. that the people rule. The government comes from stem from the authority of the people who are governed. And so these people then transported that same authority up into government. It says, no, we the people. And that's where we come from. And so our greatest acts in this country have always come from the concept of we the people.
Right.
And whenever you have an elite, and that's the very lie that I see being told about our president today, is that he's an elitist when he is really espousing these traditional principles.
He really is.
And so that's where I think that our ignorance comes into play, where we have not taken the time to really know what our history is and what these documents say and why they say what they say. And because of that, we find ourselves stuck on stupid. So we're coming to the end.
Man, we got a lot of good one-liners here today. I like it.
Okay.
Don't be stuck on stupid.
Don't be stuck on stupid.
Stay woke. Get woke.
Get woke.
We got some good one-liners happening.
So we're coming to the end of this segment. So I want to just thank everybody for taking the time to watch and to listen to the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed, shame on you. Stop whatever you're doing right now and hit the subscribe button and become a part of this conversation. As we said, we like to keep it live, like to keep it real. Hear your thoughts. We'll get back to you as we can. Until next time, God bless you. Keep it real.
Peace out.
Peace out.